Tired of big tech clashing with your Catholic values? Feday Chat is now live on the Apple App Store and Google Play Store. It's private, encrypted, and built by Catholics for Catholics, with features like parental controls and more. Connect securely with family, friends, and groups. Download Feday Chat at feday.email. Technology without compromise. Secularism in the church is probably one of the biggest problems we face today. The divisions in the church between the SSPX and Rome, between traditionally minded Catholics and everybody else, all of it has to do at its core with the adoption of secular values, which some will defend as saying it's an attempt to reach out to the world, listen to the wisdom the world might have to offer, and then adopt them and baptize those values. It's sort of the thinking behind Vatican II, so saith the people who started the council itself. But this does lead to problems, and one of the problems, of course, aside from the myriad problems of loss of faith from people and the ambiguous teachings and the inability of the church leaders to defend the deposit of the faith, especially tough moral teachings, is the coziness with Caesar that comes with this, with governments. The Vatican has for 60 years gotten very cozy with governments, going back to when Pope Paul VI laid down the papal tiara and then addressed the United Nations and said he was putting the church at the service of the world. It's an eye-opening address if you want to go read his initial address at the UN, which happened, I believe, in 1967. Now, there is no better example of this in our time than the 2020 mess. And really, it started in 2019. On October 4th was the enthronement of the Pachamama idol in the Vatican Gardens and then in St. Peter's. Just a few days later, we started getting news out of China of an affliction that nobody knew anything about. And the civil authorities there were what looked like overreacting, especially in hindsight. If you actually remember those news reports, if you were paying that much attention like I was, you saw those reports, and in hindsight, they seemed to be overreacting, as did eventually every government in the West. And the bishops took our sacraments away from us. This is how you know many of them don't have the faith. They just took the sacraments away from everybody, saying they were less essential to your life than your ability to go through a drive-thru and get a cheeseburger. Well, part of this alliance with the world was Pope Francis becoming the medication salesman of the century for the companies that make the stuff, specifically for the solution, as they called it, to the affliction that gripped the world from 2020 until 2022. And finally, some Catholics have had enough of the ambiguous nature of everything that went on at that time and of now the attempt to just forget about all of it. Remember, we were called by churchmen horrible if we saw through everything that was going on, didn't want to take their solution. And in hindsight, we were very glad we didn't. So Marco Tussati posted this open letter. It's fairly short. He posted this open letter to his website. I'll try to have the link to this later at Return to Tradition Anthony Stine Substack. But they're writing this letter to Cardinal Fernandez to ask, hey, why did this happen? Now, I am in favor of letters like this being published, sent to the Vatican and to independent media to try to get them to answer questions. However, don't think for a second you're going to get an answer. And if you get an answer, it won't be a satisfactory one. But still, getting them on the record would be good. And the only way you can do that is to at least try. So here is their letter. It's fairly short. To the Prefect of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, Cardinal Victor Manuel Fernandez, to the Secretariat of the State of the Holy See. Your Eminence, in your recent opening meditation for January 27th for the plenary session of the Dicastery for the Doctrine of the Faith, of which you are the prefect, you called for prayer and intellectual humility, particularly evoking giants of holiness and contemplation, such as St. Thomas Aquinas, St. John of the Cross, and St. Bonaventure. Saints and contemplatives of God who, if we follow them, awaken an awareness of our limits, of our need for God himself, so as not to fall into a terrible illusion, the very one that led to the excesses of the Inquisition, the World Wars, the horrible events of World War II, the horrible events going on in the Holy Land now, all situations justified by fallacious arguments. That's them quoting him directly. This list, however, omits a pivotal event that has profoundly impacted the lives of billions of people. And one gets a feeling that this omission stems from the, to say the least embarrassing, position repeatedly adopted by Pope Francis, who appointed you cardinal. A position of blind faith and pseudoscience regarding the, the thing behind the affliction of 2020 and the so-called solution. It was quickly demonstrated that the former had a very low fatality rate and could be treated at home with common medications, and that the latter was neither effective nor safe. Yet Francis himself presented the solution as an act of love, accompanied by a Vatican video and a silver coin commemorating the solution. Now, as an aside, if you're not aware of that, yeah, the Vatican did issue a commemorative coin, complete with doctors and their little tools they use to put that junk in your system. It was one of the most horrifying coins I'd ever seen, issued by the Vatican. Possibly worse than the Pachamama idol coin they issued also. That's up for debate, though. But as if that weren't enough, the solution was used as a pretext for Vatican city-state employees who refused to take it to deprive them of work and wages. In short, it was presented as an absolute principle, practically a new savior of the world. You probably remember the historical Inquisition, but many remember how, on the basis of this so-called solution, a socio-cultural Inquisition was carried out, triggered by Francis himself, who accused those who refused of self-destructive denialism. Similarly, many remember the Inquisition launched by Francis against, besides those he considered rigid and retrograde, those he called stupid, who had different opinions on the thermometer problem, even though excellent scientists take critical positions on this subject. You see, Cardinal Fernandez, the gravity of Francis's Inquisition lay precisely in this, in the fact that he conducted it not only on the theological and moral questions and on the basis of truth, but also on subjects, like those we have just mentioned, that do not fall within the Church's jurisdiction, at least not as long as there are probabilities or certainties allowing the Church itself to indicate or teach positions on the moral questions related to these subjects. Conversely, on matters specific to the Church, because they deeply touch on the truth about God and morality, Francis has, among other things, failed to answer the questions posed to him, not by a few ignorant faithful beggars, but to cite only a few examples, by 4 cardinals. I'm referring here to the 5 dubia formulated in 2016 on the document Amoris Laetitia, and a series of expert faithful, including an emeritus bishop, a theologian, philosophers, a research director from Oxford, a representative Catholic jurist, and a former president of the Institute for the Works of Religion, that'd be the Vatican Bank, who in 2017 proposed a filial correction to Francis. Francis thus proved decisive, even draconian, on matters that, as he mentioned, did not fall within the Church's jurisdiction. He also refused to answer strictly ecclesiastical questions, on which he had a duty to give, as you yourself wrote in your meditation, authoritative answers to draft documents that are integrated in the ordinary magisterium, even to correct and condemn. In short, it used to be said, Roma locuta causa finita. Roma spoke and the case is closed. Now, what the author of this letter is referring to here is the dubia. Francis has never answered the dubia. To this day, Frank Walker at Canon 212 has got a counter going for the number of days since the dubia was answered. It's like 30,424 days or something like that. It's been a long time since the dubia was submitted. No answer. During his reign, it was unfortunately said, Roma locuta causa initiatata. It does not seem in reality that the Church of Mercy, of listening, synodal, field hospital turned outwards, all concepts frequently used by Francis himself, was truly that, for all. So much so that, in keeping with this approach, it does not today make any apologies, for example, for the scandal and profoundly evangelical sense of the term, caused by the document Fiducia Supplicans, which was firmly opposed not only by some bishops, but by also entire episcopal conferences. For you, indeed, the most serious problem today is also the fact that, quote, on any blog, anyone, even those who have not done extensive theological studies, express their opinion and condemnation as if they were speaking ex cathedra. However, as already mentioned, there is no evidence that people who have studied theology and are qualified have been treated differently by Francis and by you. That is, they have been listened to and that they have been deigned to receive an answer. The aggravating circumstance that these cardinals, bishops, theologians ignored, not only had studied theology, but were invested in many cases with the authority and the mission, among other things, of assisting the Roman pontiff, both in matters of great importance and in the daily care of the whole church. See the Code of Canon Law, Canon 349.
It must be admitted, Cardinal Fernandez, that the bloggers you are targeting today have often not done extensive theological studies. But it is equally true that if they often express their opinions, it is still because, despite everything, they retain the faith. The same faith that animated St. Thomas, St. John of the Cross, and St. Bonaventure, who far from sowing confusion and division, on the contrary, strengthened and gathered the flock of the Lord, although they were not raised to the papal dignity. Can we say that Francis acted in the same way by appointing you to the dicastery of the doctrine of the faith? Wow. The gospel teaches us that we know a tree by its fruit. These are fruits of confusion, division, heresy, and even apostasy, which we have had to witness in recent years tragically. If it is true, as is the case, that we have had to witness even the celebration of the pagan idol of Pachamama in St. Peter's Basilica, even the Abu Dhabi document, which presents pluralism and the diversity of religions as the fruit of the divine will by which God created human beings. A God, then, who contradicts himself between truth and falsehood, between good and evil, and who is the exact opposite of the Lord of divine revelation, who commands, "Hear, O Israel, I am the Lord your God, you shall have no other gods before me." A God for whom Christ, the false prophet of the Eastern moon worshippers, and also the fat guy of the East and Zoroaster, are all on the same level, since my religion, as Francis himself specified during one of his trips, is no more important than yours. The Son of God is thus debased and reduced to a mere man, like any founder of another religion. You speak of deception and fallacious arguments, which led to the Inquisition, the World Wars, and even what's going on in the East, in the Holy Land. But these fallacious arguments actually consist of quoting Thomas Aquinas and other great names of mysticism and theology in a specious way, as if to conceal, under the veil of a supposed humility, what is in fact a persistent theological and moral relativism of a magnitude never before seen in the history of the Church. This is terrible because not only does it come from below, but it also is the work of those who should be the shepherds, the sure guides, and not the peddlers or receivers of every wind of doctrine. The real deception, then, is precisely this relativism, of which the ex-cathedra condemnations you denounce today as very serious are in reality only the consequence, the effect, the demonstration, the revelation for those who have eyes to see and ears to hear. They are the cry, admittedly discreet, but irritating if one tries to silence it, of those who, amidst all those who have left in recent years, still cling to the boat of the Church, a worldly boat into which no one will enter, as St. Pius X warned. Today, Cardinal Fernandez, you should be examining the true causes, the deep-rooted sources of the current grave ecclesial crisis, instead of trying to mislead and divert attention, presuming no doubt that all Catholics are indifferent, inattentive, superficial. As if to enter a church, to borrow the words of the great convert Chesterton, one had to remove not one's hat, but one's head. You don't realize in reality that many, even without in-depth theological studies, remain attached precisely and especially to those central truths that constitute the heart of the gospel. Despite the complexity of our time, they contemplate God, the Church, and the world in their essence, in their simplicity. That is to say, sin implico. Their feelings and their words are simple yes. Yes is simple no. No, because everything else comes from the evil one. In other words, they demonstrate true humility, the intelligence of the faith. Do you? Signed by Salvatore Scalia on the memorial of Saint Blaise. His open letter to Cardinal Fernandez asking to explain Francis's endorsement of the 2020 solution, but also the more broader secularization of the faith. Now, I'm very curious what you think about that. I'm very curious because you're not going to see a lot of this. You're not going to see this answered, I don't think. It's not going to happen because, quite frankly, if the church authorities were to answer the question today about what actually is going on in the church with the embrace of secularism, could you imagine Pope Leo being forced to confront, for example, his own endorsement of the immigration problem, they just opening up all the borders of the world? Can you imagine him having to square that with actual Catholic teaching? You can't. It's not possible. Catholic social teaching is very clear on this. The scriptures are pretty clear on this too, actually. If you want to go read some things that will blow your mind, go read the Old Testament and notice what led consistently to the people leaving the faith in the Old Testament. It'll hit very close to home for our time today. But the authorities in the church will not address these problems, and that's unfortunate. It truly, truly is unfortunate. We are going to endeavor to keep this one short today. It's a Saturday, and we try to keep these letters for the weekend. So let me know what you think about all of this in the comments, please. Someone asked, can a demon be a cardinal in the Catholic Church? He's not literally a demon, but you can make it can easily be made the case for him being a formal heretic. But let me know what you think about all this in the comments, please. Like and subscribe if you have not. It does help. Sharing this on social media helps too. Please pray for Cardinal Fernandez and for the person who had the audacity to write that letter to him, because it's audacity and bravery are often very similar things. And most people who would pen such a letter might read it and go, I don't want the attention this is going to bring me. It does take a certain bravery to do it. I'm Anthony Stine. Ave Maria.